Friends, as we settle into this space, I invite you to just become aware of your breath. Close your eyes, roll those shoulders back. Feel your feet on this floor in this place. And again, just trace that breath going in and out. As we savor these glorious days of fall here, man, I love fall in the Northwest. I have a birthday in a few weeks. That's probably part of it. It's associated with my birthday, but I just love the fall. And we are here in this series on change. We are embracing the nature of this season of change as we journey through this chunk of change sermon series, exploring how we listen for God nudging us and present with us, not only through the external changes that are happening all the time around us, but also exploring, too, how God steadily invites us to be changed. Mind, heart, soul change for us. You maybe got one of those S-hooks again when you came in. I love hearing them fall on the floor in the midst of worship, but we keep passing them out every Sunday. The idea is that you take that and over the course of your time here, during communion or at the end of worship, you head over to that station we have over there, you write a word of what God is saying to you. Again, this is just naming how God continues to hook us in these special moments that we call kairos, these ways in which God gets our attention. So just naming, this is really what's coming up for me. This has been a week with potentially some good kairos in it. So let's be mindful of that. So hang on to S-hook as a way of just kind of having a prayer stone to be mindful of, God is speaking. And what is God saying? So let's recap where we began last week, because in the midst of this series, last week we kicked off October as a month where our focus is on being changed into people with greater capacity for compassion. So October is Compassion Month for us, and really always is Compassion time. We should probably say that, but we're really focusing on it for the month of October. And after the week that we've had, it's timely for us to walk this path of compassion together. So before we go on the screen, do you remember what we said compassion means? What does it mean? Do you remember? Suffering. Being with suffering is the way we said it, or to suffer with is another way it was said, to be in someone else's shoes. And what's the image last week that we named, a physical object that kind of captures another way of understanding compassion? Anyone who's here last week? A compass, the mathematical compass, different than the northeast, southwest compass. This kind of compass. So the word compassion then, and compass are very similar when you put them next to each other. So the two of them, so compassion, much like the compass, which is a measuring tool, compassion is about honoring the relationship between 2 points. So between two people or between one group and another. So for October, we're living into this image, a compass connection that is there. So we're going to hold that image alongside the Jesus story and what the Jesus story tells us about compassion, about being with suffering. And although compassion is not a linear process, there's a path that we are exploring. Many have used this, such as John Philip Newell. It's a threefold way, and it is a very courageous way. It takes a lot of courage. So the compassionate way is the courage to see, the courage to feel, and the courage to act. So see, feel, act. These are our movements over these weeks. So last week we did explore what it means to see with compassion. The courage to see, we named how if we're going to have courage to suffer with, then we have to get close enough to actually see the suffering, the person, the group. So we named how compassion happens in close proximity. And we received the invitation to step closer in some way to the suffering of the families who are experiencing homelessness in the New Bethlehem Day Center, folks who share this home, this building with us, a place that is already in close proximity to us. And as we quoted Dan last week, what is happening as we move forward to selling land for a 24-hour shelter, as Dan said, we're kind of a big deal. Or really what is happening here, the collaboration with so many people, it is really a big deal. This is the kingdom of God. And so what would it look like for us to move towards that? So we continue to hold all of that from last week. I catch you all up, review with you, so that we can hold on to that, the seeing piece, as we move then into feeling. All right, y'all with me? All right, so let's dive in. So Jesus, throughout the Gospels, is described as moving through this path of compassion. He sees, he feels, he acts. And we could turn to any number of those places as an example, but we're going to actually turn back to one that we've been listening to prayerfully 2 weeks ago. We used it for Lectio Divina. We heard it again last week, this passage from Luke 2. This is an experiment for me, for us, to come back a few times, a few weeks in a row to the same passage together and see what happens when we do that. So let's look at this passage again. It's Luke 7, 11 through 17 from the Message. Greg can come on back up and read that for us.
Luke chapter 7, verses 11 through 17. Not long after that, Jesus went to the village Nain. His disciples were with him, along with quite a large crowd. As they approached the village gate, they met a funeral procession. A woman's only son was being carried out for burial, and the mother was a widow. When Jesus saw her, his heart broke. He said to her, "Don't cry." Then he went over and touched the coffin. The pallbearers stopped. He said, "Young man, I tell you, get up." The dead son sat up and began talking. Jesus presented him to his mother. They all realized they were in a place of holy mystery, that God was at work among them. They were quietly worshipful and then noisily grateful, calling out among themselves, "God is back, looking to the needs of his people." The news of Jesus spread all through the country.
Thank you, Greg. So let's look again at Jesus' response here as he says, or as it says, when Jesus saw her, his heart broke. Specifically, I want us to look at the Greek word that's translated here as heart broke. In other translations, it's felt deeply, or it is the word compassion. So this here is Jesus feeling compassion. The Greek word here is the word that is compassion in Greek. And so when Jesus saw her, he was moved with compassion. So you may know this, but the Greek word here is based on the noun splankna. Can you say splankna? Splankna. One more time. So it is a word that means kind of what it actually sounds like. Do you know what it means? Anyone know what it means? It does. Guts, organs, like intestines, like entrails. That's what this word is. It is guts, says the guy who's in medical school over there. Right? Yeah. Well done. So just jump with me then to first century Middle Eastern culture, among speakers of first century Greek, Koine Greek is what it is. For those folks, human emotions were thought to exist in the gut. Whereas in English, where do we locate our feelings? Where do we say they are? In our heart, right? A little bit up here. So I wouldn't recommend telling your beloved, "I love you with all of my intestines." I tried, though, with Jason. I don't know how. But anyway, but that would actually work well if you know anyone who speaks Koine Greek as a first language. A little pro tip on the old love life. So splankna, it's used 8 times in the New Testament to describe Jesus' emotions. As he moves through the seeing, feeling, acting kind of movement of compassion, this describes what it is that he feels as he is in a moment of compassion. So this is one of those places here in Luke 7 when Jesus sees this woman, a widow, who mourns over her dead son, and the text says his heart overflowed with compassion. His heart broke, or in that cultural setting, he felt it in his guts. So as we define compassion, we're defining as being with suffering. We see in Jesus here that a piece of that being with is feeling it in our guts, in our hearts, in our current vernacular. To be heartbroken, letting that compassion connection, that compass connection, getting close enough, but then also feeling it activates our heart too. So my friends, to get close enough to see suffering and then to splankna, letting ourselves feel it, I wonder, how easy is that for you? How are you at splankna-ing? For me, I think this is hard work. And that's what I want to dig into for us for our time together today. I want to unpack just 2 of the reasons why splankna is hard. Feeling compassion is hard, and then I want to press into what the Jesus story then tells us, speaks to about this, including what the Jesus story speaks into this week that we've lived through. So, okay, you ready? All right, so this is what we're looking at, the reason why splankna is hard. So the first reason why splankna is hard is, frankly, honestly, we often don't actually feel our feelings. We often don't feel our feelings. So let me unpack this, what I mean by that, by sharing a bit about just my own journey in this last year. I've been in a leadership development program for a year. It's based in cognitive development and psychology and psychoanalytics, so it's very science-based, and it's in a cohort of other leaders. So I'm sitting around the table with other leaders, folks from like Microsoft and the Gates Foundation and local startups and Boeing. They find it kind of novel that I'm a pastor. So you do what? So it's a fun setting for me. And we meet monthly for 3 hours, and during those hours, each session covers a different essential, another just key teaching that we learn about and kind of practice together. All of it is very rooted in the practice of being present to ourselves, to the relational dynamics in our lives. Again, it's rooted in brain functioning and in scientific research that informs the way that we function in relationships, including how we lead. So back in the spring, we had a session, and it was a session we were learning about the different personality types. So for this particular course, we actually used Freud's original personality types. And so we were looking at 7 of them. And like as you go down the list, I mean, it's Freud. So you're going, there's nothing good here. You know, you're like, there's none of them. I'm pulling for this one. This is one I hope I am. Like all of them are just like, oh, that's rough. But we're reading through the descriptions of these types, and I see one that I clearly am in this. And as I sat in that session, I'm at this table with 8 other leaders, and I'm looking at my type, and I turn to our facilitator, and I say something like, you know, this doesn't make sense, though. I mean, I see it, but it's not. It also doesn't make sense that this is my type, because this is like a very like heady type that really manages anxiety through thinking about things and like keeping busy and really avoids feelings. And that can't be me because I'm a pastor. I mean, I am a feeling person, right? I'm a feeling person. So the conversation that followed, as well as the week that followed of like me just processing and gnashing of teeth that as I'm processing all of this, which happened to be during Holy Week leading up to Easter, so that was helpful. Just a lot happening that week. So here's what I realized about myself. So I'm a pastor, and I spend a lot of time in other people's feelings. Before we started Salt House, I served a church in the San Francisco Bay Area for 7 years. I was the head of congregational care for a church of about 1,500 people. So I was like all up in people's feelings like all the time, right? Like the good, the bad, the ugly, just all the stuff. I was a psychology major. Like I love it. I love creating safe space for people to hear God, for people to step into the grief or the joy that they need to process. Like, I love it. Like, I'm all about other people's feelings. But here's what I realized. I spend little time actually feeling what I am feeling. I see some people going, mm-hmm. I don't know if that's because you're like, yes, Sarah, I know this about you, or because you identify with it, but I'm just going to appreciate the nodding. So just little time in my own feelings. And it's not that I don't feel anything, but especially when it comes to the more challenging feelings like sadness, fear, anger, disappointment, I will experience those, and often I just kind of get cranky as those things just like simmer under the surface, like unattended to, like not being named or expressed. So when I'm like, that'll be me because there's like unprocessed grief or something that's happening underneath. So I often don't feel my feelings. I'm not as much of a feeling person as I thought I was. So as you might guess, this was just a huge kairos for me, right? Because it totally just messes with my sense of identity, and it continues to be just a great place of learning and breakthrough for me, which has not been easy, but just huge ongoing kairos. So here's the additional thing, why I bring it up for all y'all to know. The other personality types that we learned about as well, most of them in different ways and for different reasons than my type, Most of them also do not default to expressing feelings in consistent, healthy ways. There's a lot of denial or intellectualizing or avoiding or stuffing or just keeping busy to keep from actually stopping and being honest and present in what we feel. So this holds true then for a lot of the people in this world. And that includes a lot of people here then in this room. That's also people in our families, in our circle of friends. There are, of course, also personality types who are super feeling, right? Who are very emotional all the time, very dramatic, like very connected to that. So there is that too. There's that spectrum. So no matter what type, wherever someone falls, there's always like healthy ways to function, and it's good to just have awareness of knowing who you are and the growth edges that you have. But I share this with you because I wonder if you, like me, might benefit from a little kairos, a reorienting to recognize that maybe you're someone that spends time in other people's feelings, your friends or your parents or your children's, your coworkers, the actors on the show This Is Us, let's be honest about that one. But how much do you let yourself feel what you actually feel? Without filtering it, without judging it. So the first reason splankna, feeling compassion, is hard is that we are not so great about feeling many of the things that we feel. That holds true for the positive feelings, the awesome stuff too, that we're just out of touch with ourselves and the busyness of our lives. We often don't feel our feelings. So hold on to that. We're going to come back to what we can kind of do and how we live into that a little bit in a moment. But I want to move into the just second reason why splankna is hard. So just two reasons why it's hard. It's hard to feel all the feels. And second, number two, is simply what I and many others call compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is what it sounds like. It's when we are exhausted from being with suffering. Here's what I mean. We have the potential to see so much suffering with how connected we are with technology, every day. The last few weeks, hurricanes, earthquakes, and now the shooting in Las Vegas, I want to be clear too that a lot of that suffering, that we are removed from much of what we do see. Like, we are not in Syria right now, right? We're not in Puerto Rico. We were not in Las Vegas. And we do also, though, experience suffering close up too. I think of those in our community who are parents, who are 24-hour caregivers in various capacities for loved ones. They live just on the brink of compassion fatigue most days. Or those of us who work in helping professions. We have counselors and CPS workers. We have public health nurses, teachers. So many of us see suffering in our everyday close-up lives too. Not to mention what we ourselves are facing in our friends and our family. So we see so much suffering. So in light of all of that, how easy is it to just glaze over, right? To grow numb. That is compassion fatigue. Exhausted from being with suffering. We're exhausted by it. And within the fatigue, I think there's fear. There's fear that keeps us then from actually feeling. We're afraid that we won't know what to do if we start to feel. Or maybe we're afraid that, that as we get in there, what we think we should do will cost us too much. Or if we start to feel even worse, we're afraid that there's nothing that we can do. Or if we start to feel to be brokenhearted, that our broken heart won't stop. I think I experienced all of these fears this week, just in my own processing. Jason and I kept commenting, man, we're just so tired this week. What's going on? We felt so worn down. And we came to recognize that so much of it was the weight of Las Vegas. And on Wednesday, I was asked, so what are you thinking about Las Vegas? And my response was just, I just can't. Like, I just can't. For me. So for me, it was look, another mass shooting. I don't have the bandwidth to feel this right now. I can't, when it sure feels like nothing's going to change in our country. And if I do feel it, will the sadness, will the hopelessness, the anger, the fear, will it stop? So I just have to name that I was in like the avoidance. Just felt like a much better plan for me for much of this week, rather than feeling it. This week, compassion fatigue for me. Friends, have you felt that way this week in your own way? Have you felt that at other times? Compassion fatigue, just exhausted from the being with suffering. So these are two barriers for why feeling compassion is hard. And of course, there's more than just that, but I feel like those are two big ones for us. So with all of this, into those places of feeling how hard it is to feel, in naming our own compassion fatigue, my own compassion fatigue for this week, here's what we need to name and remind each other of. It's what the Jesus story brings to bear on this week. So here is what we cling to. First, we name that we follow a suffering Savior. Not a God who wins all the time. That's not the kind of God that we follow. But a God who suffers. This is our God. In Jesus, who chose to be with those who suffered, those who hardly existed because they were so far out on the fringes of their society. Because of their gender, because of their illness, because of their age, because of their track record of messing up, because of their poverty, because of their nonconformity. Jesus grabbed hold of those people who were suffering, and he suffered with them. And yes, he suffered to the point of receiving the most humiliating form of public execution, being mocked and whipped and hung on a cross, which made the process of dying long and drawn out and excruciating. Our God chose to see the suffering of our world, to feel it and to act. Our God is the God of suffering. Man, I need to remember that this week. My friends, this matters. It matters to come back to this story of our God who suffers, to remember this, because there's a whole new week that starts tomorrow, right? New headlines to follow. There will be more suffering. We'll keep getting pushed over that threshold of compassion fatigue. It's just the way that our world is. And our capacity for compassion is limited. Our capacity for it is limited. This could give us, all of this could be like, well, that's it, I'm done. You know, it could be such a cause for like despair, for shutting down, for numbing, to not put ourselves on the line emotionally and vulnerably and engaging with our world. But that's not the Jesus story. God's story is the one where we have access to unlimited compassion. We place our lives in the grace and power of this God who chooses the path of suffering. And it is the power and grace and mystery of God that carries us through those fatigue times when we need more compassion than we can muster on our own. We don't have to muster it on our own. And this is the same source that's there in our own challenge to feel what we actually feel. The Jesus story is not a story that tells us that we should feel like everything is sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows all the time. Like it's not like, okay, just smile, everything's all right. The Jesus story invites us to feel all the things. And to know that there is light and compassion there beyond what we can, again, just feel or sustain on our own. That's why the Psalms are there, right? Smack in the middle of the Bible. There's 150 Psalms, chapters there to give us words to express our feelings when we don't have the words ourselves. The Psalms are just this rich collection of songs, and they span the full breadth of human emotion, from joy to sadness to betrayal to hopelessness to ecstasy to hilarity to fear, anxiety, disappointment, confusion, celebration. It's all there. It's all part of God's story, our story. And as we've named before, God invites us not to be put together people who have it figured out, but to be wholehearted people who feel all the things, who access that courage to feel. So my friends, frankly, really we should be exhausted today. We should be worn down and weary with all the suffering in our world that we've seen and many of us have experienced this week, and how hopeless it feels that anything will change tomorrow, that there could be a new day. And so we should come here with our fatigue to gather in the name of the God of love and the God of suffering and the God of compassion knowing that we can be refueled. We can tap into a source beyond ourselves. We don't have to have the right words or the energy to deal with it, the wisdom, the perspective, because our God is the God of suffering. The God who suffered, our God who continues to be present in our places of pain, crying out with us. That's what we come to remember. That's what we came to be tapped into again. So we let ourselves splankna, knowing that there is grace to hold us in our sadness. That lets us be in that suffering, and that's okay to be there, and then pulls us out of that pit when it's time. And yes, there will be times where we move from that place of feeling into action, continuing down that path. That's what we will talk about next week. But for today we stay in and we milk that, being present in our feeling. The other piece of compassion, fatigue, and feeling all the things in both of these areas, we have to name too that it's okay to have boundaries around what we do move toward, the things that we do use that compass connection for and see and feel. It's okay that there are things that we will move toward and there are things that we will choose not to. Again, we see so much suffering. So we don't have to be with all of the suffering that we see, right? It's not possible. And so we can, with intention and care, carve out those boundaries, and we can choose to not move towards particular places, situations of suffering. We can lift those people and places in prayer, knowing that God has the capacity to bring others alongside, to be that presence of compassion alongside those who need it. So friends, in light of all of this, to close our time, I want to just offer us a way to respond in the next few minutes as well as beyond today. So again, just being mindful to hold that hook, to be mindful of holding that question of what is God saying to me in all of this as we move through this together. So in a moment, we're going to start singing a song, and we've set up the space to be one where we can kind of enter into two practices. The first, we have sent out candles here. Each candle here representing the 58 innocent people who were shot in Las Vegas at the hands of Stephen Paddock. There's also a candle for him, so there are 59 candles here. We include a candle for him. We light a candle for all because that is what compassion stirs in us, the fierce choice to see the humanity in every person and not get pulled into that black and white thinking that some are good and some are not. Once we label people in that way, compassion is shut down. So today we light a candle for all who have died. We light it in sadness, in anger, in hope, and in memory for all. I want to name too that lighting a candle, in a sense, it doesn't do anything in the sense that it won't change our nation's policies on gun control. It won't fund support for children who have lost parents this week. Those are things that we can also do. But we come and light candles to name what we come back to again and again, that we know that there is light in this world, that the light of Jesus is at work, bringing resurrection and hope and blessing on the other side of these deaths and in the midst of this tragedy. We light candles to say yes to this, to name that there is a God at work beyond ourselves, beyond what we can do on our own, for which we are so grateful. That's why we practice this. So please light a candle as we start to sing at any time during this song. Just to come forward, there'll be lighting sticks, but then also during communion will also be a time for that. But I invite you to light one as a sign, too, of your own prayer today. The second way that I invite you to be present in this song of response is to feel your feelings. So in light of my kairos, around like, oh, wait, I'm not a feeling person. My own rhythm in my own life, like throughout my week, I make time to feel, which sounds kind of funny. But sometimes it just happens over the course of my day. But I'll also take time. I'll light a candle and breathe, or I'll go for a run. I'll just become curious and aware about what's happening in my splankna, in my guts, in my heart, and just open myself up to my body, feeling the sensations of those feelings. And I know it sounds kind of mechanical. Now I shall feel. I know it's kind of weird. But it also has been truly life-giving and really a game changer for me. and still desperately hard to practice, especially in a week like this one. So I commend this practice to you, just to figure out what would it look like for you to make space to feel and to tap into what you are feeling. So hold that as just something to carry with you in the old tool belt of things that you can try. But I want to finish our time by making that space to feel here together. In addition to then taking time to light candles at any point during this song or during communion, you can also do it too, but I invite you to feel what you're feeling. We're going to do it together, yet holding space. So we're doing it collectively, yet also holding space in honor and in confidence, and just knowing that we experience this together and honoring that our neighbors in the room too. So friends, I invite you to close your eyes if that's comfortable for you, to again feel your feet on this floor, to roll your shoulders back, and let your attention move to your guts and to your belly, to your heart. What sensations are there when you breathe deeply? Is there a tightness in your chest, a heaviness in your gut? Or is there a lightness? Maybe you're feeling deep peace and gratitude, a knot of grief or anger. When I do this, I find that there are things hiding in there that I didn't know were there. So what feelings have you carried this week? What is with you in your body this morning? It is helpful to name the feelings that come up, but naming them is different than actually letting your body feel it. So if anything, let your body lead you into the feeling first, and then worry about the naming and the understanding it later. As we do this, let's pray. I'm just going to pray over us the words from Psalm 139. God, you have searched us and you know us. You know when we sit and when we rise. You perceive our thoughts and our feelings from afar. You discern our going out and our lying down. You are familiar with all our ways, with what we see, with what we feel. Before a word is on our tongue, you, God, you know it completely. You hem us in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon us. Such knowledge is too wonderful for us, too lofty for us to attain. Search us, God, and know our heart, that we too may know our own heart. Test us and know our anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in us, and lead us in the way everlasting, the way of compassion.